Well, again, good evening, and I really appreciate Heather you reaching out to Badger Talks, and in light of the talk that I gave on farmers markets a month or two ago, I really appreciate your interest. I really enjoy this part of my role as a professor at the university. I engage the community in so much of my research on behalf of community purposes. And as far as I'm concerned, this is as important as anything else that I do. So
Oh,
I appreciate your time
yeah,
and
and thank you
everybody.
very much for sharing.
Sure, sure, you bet, you bet. And at any point, folks, just jump in. Uh, I, I understand Heather's going to be able to keep a queue and tell me to stop, okay? But today, is this going to work? There we go. So I've got about 10 slides I'll go through, 9 slides I'll go through, give you some high-level overview of different things, but I'll try and connect what you just said in the introduction to some of my own personal biographical aspects. My takeaway to folks is something that I think you know intuitively, and that is that food is a relationship. It's a relationship between a person and a soil or other growing medium, right? It's a relationship between that person and supply chain activities like processing and distribution. It's a relationship between the consumer and their where they pick up food. It's a relationship between the consumer and their household. And then it's a relationship between the consumer and what they do with the food that they don't end up eating. And so with respect to that last point, reducing food waste means adopting new relationships to that food, right? Think of it as a resource, not so much a waste, right? But as a resource for composting for other purposes. So adopting new relationships to food or reconstructing the old ways of thinking. And I was delighted to hear Lynn talking about, because I grew up on a farm ranch operation in New Mexico, and you bet the hogs got all the leftovers, you know? And so I appreciated what she said there. So let's just talk a little bit. It might be more, but just a quick figure from the last time I taught undergraduate farmers markets class, there's about 55 million metric tons of food wasted. And by that, we mean that definition has to do with what ends up in landfills, okay? And that process, that measurement, is done by what's called a food waste audit, where basically you take core samples from different landfills, and that's how they arrived at this number. Now, and it turns out that most food waste, for instance, the city of Los Angeles, can be recycled. It is sufficiently free of pesticides or other chemicals that it can be safely composted or put to other purposes. So where does food waste start? Well, oftentimes it starts in the field. Now, I don't think it was Lynn that said this, but one of the first people who made a comment, and you feel free to chime in, talked about how they wanted that they were concerned about making sure that food doesn't get wasted in grocery stores or other places. Well, the first place to think about food waste is in the field. And there are a number of things, a number of ways that people reduce food waste, gleaning, for instance, and undesirable produce. This is, over the last 5 or 10 years, we've heard discussions of ugly produce, right? And people making, putting to good use food that would otherwise go wasted. Here on campus, here in Madison at the UW, there's a group of faculty, I can't remember the name of them, I should have thought about this, but it just came to me. There's a group of faculty that go out, retired faculty, that go out to local farms to glean. They go out and glean food and bring back huge sacks of everything, potatoes, carrots, that wouldn't otherwise get sold, and make it available in food pantries. They clean it up, right? So that you feel like you're in a shopping experience. Because who wants to go get their groceries and find a bunch of dirty, right? It's kind of a matter of dignity, right? Kind of like conveying the fact that every human has dignity, and that we want to embrace that.
And I think that was Kathy and Bob, Kathy Shaw and Bob Storm. They were mentioning Just One More Ministry. It was started, actually, Kathy and Bob and I and my husband go to church together, and it was started in our
Uh,
church kitchen. And it's based now in, I think, the North City of Milwaukee on the north side. And they were rescuing food. So from grocery stores, and also the big thing, like Kathy mentioned, is the catering, any leftovers from catering gigs, which now that's so much markedly lower because there aren't events, or at least not events in person. So it's a great organization. They now switched to making disposable masks. So
another great cause, right? Another very important thing to be doing. And the next place we can think about food waste is in regulation and law. Oh my goodness, I have a demonstration for you. Just one second. I apologize. Oh my goodness. What is a professor without his props, right? His or her props, right? So one of the things when we think about composting, we need to recognize that our neighbors might not like it. And indeed, I've worked with the city of Kansas City, actually, to help them design urban agricultural ordinances around home and municipal composting. And I've written professionally on this subject in journals like Zoning Practice to help municipalities come up with ways of establishing reasonable composting regulations that serve the purposes folks like you have and serve the purposes of your neighbors who aren't interested. But composting, right, believe it or not, there's law around law and ordinance around composting. And then there's dietary guidelines, which are also a matter of law. So let's see. I sure hope you all can see this. If you see that, it says US #1. Heather, can you read that?
so where does it say that? Up at the top there?
US.
Oh, US #1, and it says 20% halves with pieces for walnut.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
US #1. Where did that come from? Does that just mean US is #1? No. Where did that come from? It's a matter of law. The USDA sets forth grading standards for various products. That's where we get the distinction ugly, right? Things that are #2s or otherwise. This is a matter of law. And the law was actually at the convenience of processors who wanted apples to all be the same size and shape, or tomatoes to have a certain kind of firmness to them. And everybody on this call, I'm going to guess, sorry, but we're all old enough. We're all old enough to remember the fights, right? In the 70s, the way tomatoes tasted, oh my goodness. You know, I never wanted to eat a tomato from the grocery store because my folks, we had the tomatoes in our backyard were awesome, you know? And I said to myself, why is there such a big difference? Part of the difference came from the need to produce uniformly gradable products of particular standards. It's a matter of promulgation of standards, ordinances. So food waste, our relationship to food waste is in part dictated by law. That's my point here. Okay, then you have culture, right? You have culture and social effects. What is good food? What is bad food, right? You can have, this is where I was supposed to demonstrate the label. I'm sorry. These things are a matter of perspective and the relativity of perspective. We all agree that feeding people is important. We want to make food available to them. However, not everybody's going to want to get that food unless it looks like there's been some attention paid to it. And so I want to build on the example I gave a little while ago of the faculty, the retired faculty here at UW that go out and glean. So when they started doing that about 12, 14 years ago, they would take very large boxes, cardboard boxes of new potatoes, not #1s, but new potatoes, to the local St. Vincent de Paul, other food outfits. And but those potatoes went unused. Why did they go unused? And so the folks in those food security places started asking the visitors, well, you know, here's these potatoes. Why won't you take them? Because they don't look like what's in the store. Well, what do you mean they're potatoes? They look great. But you know what? I've got to clean it up and it's a lot of work and what, you know, and this and that. Well, it is free. Well, you know, and so as the conversations would go on, it kind of came to the idea of, well, just because I don't have any money, am I going to have to go through all the trouble that somebody else won't have to go to just because they have money? And for folks in many religious organizations, that boiled down, what I understood from then was that boiled down to a question of dignity. It was all good food, but do the folks who are partaking of it, do they feel respected in getting that food? So, but there's another dimension of this. There is, broadly speaking, cultural or class dimensions of food waste. Folks, I hazard to guess, like us, are not worried particularly about paying our bills. We have tools we can cook with in our homes. We have stoves that work. We have refrigerators that can store food, freezers that can transform banana peels into banana bread, which I'm going to try, Heather. That's wonderful, right? But not everybody does. I know this is crazy, but I was flabbergasted when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. I was 28 years old, something like that, when I moved to Chicago, 27, something like that. And I discovered that all kinds of folks in neighborhoods in Chicago weren't able to pay their bills regularly, did not have working appliances that they could rely on. And so economic class has a great deal to say about people's consumption habits and their ability to access and use healthy food. We all care about these matters, and the question is always going to be how. In terms of culture, I had in mind y'all's ideas about religious groups and other organizations. But I put visitors there in parentheses because we have 4 boxes of Caramel Delight Girl Scout cookies that are uneaten. Why? Because my in-laws haven't visited, and my father-in-law loves those things, right? He just loves those things. I'm going to have to put them in a box and ship them to him with his Sudoku, because I cut out Sudoku for him all the time and send those to him too. So our cultures have something to do with, and our personal experiences have something to do with how we relate to food. Many things. One of the things in your grocery stores, think about skirt steak, right? Fajitas in Spanish. You all know fajitas, right? When I was a young man, I'm 58, just for transparencies. When I was 12, 14, 18, 20 years old, I remember fajitas being a cut of beef that butchers threw away. Now, it's 12 bucks a pound. Things change. Cultures intermix, right? People borrow ideas from each other. And so culture has something to do with how we relate to food and what we consider food waste. And this is where I wanted to highlight Lynn. So I think Eric mentioned this and Kashan on religion, and I wanted to mention Lynn because that waste not, what not mentality that you grew up with, Lynn, is a mentality probably many of us grew up with. I grew up with it as well. And it is. It's something that then that follows people throughout their lives. It's an aspect of their household culture, you might say, that's important to them. So again here, the point is that we all care about food waste, but the way we care about it depends in part on our perspective, which is in part also given by what we think of as habitual, right? What we have habitual access to in our homes and in our experiences. Okay, so there's another, I do a whole lot of work on farmers markets. around the country. I feel like it's getting dark in my room here. I hope you all can see me okay. But anyways, I do a whole lot of work with farmers markets and food systems around the country. I've published 6 books. I've got, done all kinds of grant work on a whole host of topics. But farmers markets is among them. And farm to pantry is something that happens at a lot of farmers markets, where where people go to the farmers market and do a deal with the vendors to either purchase or take away at the end of the day food that would otherwise might be wasted and make it available. And that's beautiful food. You all know who visited farmers markets, that's beautiful food. So that cultivates relationships with local farmers, that improves that those local farmers are working their land specifically to support organic production many times. And that's very important. That relationship that we have with those farmers, supporting them, supports their relationship in good farm management practices and in supporting organic agriculture. Working with farmers markets is also important because it increases biodiversity. You can get so many different things at your farmers market that even the most well-stocked grocery store don't always have. That also makes for shorter supply chains, shorter distribution, and lower the environmental burden for the supply of food in places. And of course, shopping locally stimulates local economies. So there's, even though the topic is food waste, the notion is that our perspective, right, helps us understand that farmers markets can, the many things that they do, among those many things is an opportunity to reduce food waste and increase food security. Okay, so the last thing that I've got to say is speaking about food security, generally speaking. One of the things that I have created is something called farmtofacts.org. It is actually a tool for farmers market managers. And those farmers market managers can use it to collect data that makes them the boss of their farmers market. They can use it to collect data about their farmers market, do analysis, and do reporting with stakeholders in their community. And so from my perspective, that is, my friends, those of you who are Wisconsin, UW-Madison folks, that is the Wisconsin idea. I'm a firm believer in forward. The Wisconsin idea is super important. I've been a professor for 25 years, the last 15 here at Madison. And one of the big attractions of this campus was that idea. I feel very important, I feel it's very strongly, I feel it's very important to support the community in mutually achievable goals. So I have this as a member organization, Farm to Facts, member for farmers markets, that is to say, and I'm always looking for support. Hate to say it, I got my hat in my hand here in this slide. I'm always looking for support to pay for my students who work with farmer markets around the country and in Canada, by the way. Okay, so just saying, I was very, very fortunate that we have folks who donate to the fund, but my goal, of course, is that enough farmers markets around the country decide to join up that we become self-sustaining. It's a cost recovery program of the University of Wisconsin. So in conclusion, folks, and I haven't heard any questions, I hope I haven't run roughshod over anybody. I just want to remind you that food is relationship. And so either using food in new ways, which has been the subject that many of you all desired to hear, but I did not deliver, and I'm sorry about that. But using food in new ways is very important. That means you have developed a new relationship to your food, and that's really important. And of course, we're all trying to figure out ways to support other folks in developing healthy relationships to food, whether it's from the farmer and the field to the distribution and the supply chain to the consumer, and giving the consumer, making sure that the consumer has ways to consume healthy food. Across that supply chain, we all have concerns and we all have relationships that we can help reconstruct. And so I got to tell you, I